Hello and welcome back to the Q&A. So as always, if you've got a question, whether it's lore or gameplay, be sure to leave it down in the comments of the video and I will get to it at some stage. Anyway, with all that covered, let's get right into the questions, and I'll start off with one from Leyland who asked, basically, will Blizzard ever reconsider their decision to do yearly expansions? Now, just as a little bit of background, during, I think it was August actually at Gamescom, there were a few interviews with WoW developers, including Tom Chilton, and throughout those interviews, one of the common themes that we heard about was increasing the overall pace of content, i.e. just yearly expansions. Now, I think that this was obviously just something that was offhand said in an interview, so it's not really a solid plan or anything like that. It's not like they told us, yes, Warlords of Draenor is coming out on the 13th of November, and on the 13th of November next year, we'll have another expansion. That just isn't really how it plays out, but they certainly have indicated that yearly expansions could be a thing. They also said that the patch that was going to be in Farallon may not actually happen, and that Warlords of Draenor may indeed only have 2 raid tiers. So there's a lot of, there's definitely a lot to support the idea that Warlords of Draenor may only last a year. Now, time to talk about this question. Well, the specific question was, will they ever reconsider it? I would say yes, and the reason for that's of course because if something makes sense, Blizzard will do it. If it makes sense for an expansion to be a year, they will hopefully do that. And if it makes sense for one to be longer, then, well, they'll do that. But I do want to throw in my few cents on this issue, especially in regards to Warlords of Draenor itself. I think that making Draenor a year-long expansion is a little bit of a shame. Actually, I think there's a lot of potential content here, and there's definitely room for a 3rd raid tier, like a middle raid tier. Because we will have the initial Ironhorde related stuff of the tier that we're currently doing, then we will have the Tanaan Jungle tier, which will be the final one of the expansion, in which we defeat the Ironhorde and then, well, whatever Burning Legion stuff happens. And there definitely could be room for a middle tier in Farallon. We don't know what's going on wherever Farallon is. We know that it's decently mysterious, so there's definitely a lot of potential. Now, the way that things worked, all the way back in the original Draenor, I believe, is that Velen called in the aid of the Naru, and then the Naru came to the planet, helped out, and just various problems sort of occurred. Now, in the alternate universe, those same Naru are still floating around the place, right? And we know the Burning Legion are coming. Therefore, I think it makes a lot of sense to have some sort of cool time travel-ish take on what could go on with Farallon, with perhaps those Naru being called down by a different character, because obviously now Velen is just a little bit dead. I think that could be really cool, and one of my broader worries about year-long expansions is that we would lose out on some of the potential of the various settings that Blizzard have put into these expansions. If we look back at any of the past expansions, I think most of them would suffer if they lost any of their raid tiers. Though I suppose for the topic of maybe Wrath of the Lich King, maybe we could have done without Trial of the Crusader, but I suppose that whole thing is its own kettle of fish. Still, look at Ulduar. If we didn't have Ulduar, Wrath would have suffered for it. Look at Throne of Thunder. I think it was one of the really, better raids in Mists of Pandaria. I thought it was really fun. In general, those mid-tiers have just got something that's a little bit different, it's interesting content, and doing a yearly expansion would be at the expense of that. So, my biggest worry about year-long expansions is just losing out on some of the potentially awesome stuff that we could have. And I think Farallon could be extremely cool, and yeah, it sort of does suck that that might not end up being a thing in this expansion. Another point is that often a lot of those extra patches that happen in an expansion that lasts for 18 months introduce some sort of new landmass or new thing, right? I suppose Draenor could end up just being us playing around in these zones that we know for a while, then 6-point Tanaan happening, us doing Tanaan, and then that being it over. Often having a new raid tier does, or that 3rd raid tier in expansion does mean a new landmass or a new art style or just something new and a bit different, which I think does help to break up the expansion, especially because that's often a patch that happens roughly in the middle of the expansion. I think that Cataclysm would have got old faster if it didn't have the Firelands popping in and being a little bit different. I think Pandaria would have definitely got old fast in terms of the actual world without the Isle of Thunder coming in and being a little bit different. And if Warlords of Draenor just ends up being us hanging out on Draenor in those same zones, and then popping off to Tanaan to lop the head off Grommash, then, you know, maybe the world could get old a little bit too fast. Next, I've got a question from Tech Ties, who asked, anyone getting tired of Warlords of Draenor already? That's really it's a good question, because it's something that I've seen so many comments on throughout my videos, and I suppose throughout the internet in general. And I think that the answer is absolutely yes. A sizable proportion of the or at least of the people who are involved in watching videos and reading news sites, the more, I guess, engaged people, a large amount of them do seem to be getting rather tired. Now, when I say large, I probably mean from maybe, you know, 10 to 15 to 25%, not anything ginormous, but I definitely get that it is a feeling that's out there. And I think it's because so much of Warlords of Draenor is really with the garrison, right? And the actual garrison content at this stage for a lot of people has ended up just turning into a Farmville game, or something like that, where you logging into World of Warcraft, because, you know, your main character that you care about is now past dungeon gear, it just involves you logging in, going to your garrison mission board and whatever else you have, turning in the missions, putting your followers off on new ones, and then logging out again because there maybe isn't a great deal else that you feel like doing. I think that's kind of strange. Warlords of Draenor does so well initially because there's so much variety in how you get gear, but after a certain stage that obviously wears off, and when you look at the other content in Warlords of Draenor, perhaps it's a little bit sparse or lacking. Certainly reputations are, well, frankly, god-awful when it comes to Warlords of Draenor, and because the reputations are earned by essentially just doing the Apex's daily quests, which at this stage a lot of people are very jaded against, and because of that, reputations may as well not exist in Warlords of Draenor. Personally, I can say that it's usually at around this time in an expansion where I've got my initial gear and I'm just, you know, logging in weekly to do my raids. When I'm at this stage, that's when I like to focus on doing things like reputations, and just those other little side objectives, maybe even doing the lore walker stuff back in Mists of Pandaria or a bit of archaeology or something like that. Whereas in Warlords of Draenor, the reps are crap, so I'm not going to do that because the gameplay just isn't that good. If we hop over to PvP, while I found the initial honor stuff to be really fun, past that I think that Ashran is really very, very lackluster, so a lot of people have just wrote that off. So really, what are you left with? Well, other than your challenge modes to get 640 gear, your LFR every week, and just doing raids with a guild, there isn't that much. It's a bit strange. If only that variety that was really there up until the point where you were sort of post-item level 636, if only that variety was able to persist for longer, but of course it isn't, and I suppose that's a little bit unfortunate. That said, there is, I suppose, on paper plenty to do in Warlords of Draenor. It's just that I think the quality of the content isn't always great. Like, the quality of those Apexis missions means that I just don't feel like doing them. I'm sorry, I don't. If they were more interesting, then sure, maybe I'd care a bit, you know, a bit more about this Apexis system, but the content's crap. That's why I don't care about the reps, because the content is crap, honestly. Archaeology is, I think, just a very lackluster profession, so I'm a little bit sad about that. And when you move on to some of the profession buildings in the garrison, there's only so much time gating and waiting for daily cooldown resources that people can do before they just feel really tired of it all. Look at the barn, right? There's only so much of that barn work that you can do before it just feels like such a chore. And while some of that is tied into interesting progression, when all of these sort of, I don't want to say time wasting, but, you know, time gating mechanics are implemented, after the stage of a month and a half, people just get very internally just jaded against it. They just think, oh, for feck's sake, I am not going to kill any more of those damn elite Cleftus again. I've been doing this every 2 days for a month and a half, and I've had enough. I think a lot of people are just getting to that stage now, and the best way for Blizzard to fix this, frankly, is patch 6.1, what patch 6.1 needs to do, and I think I'll probably cover this in its own video sometime, but it needs to get people out into the garrison, and it needs to make really, really awesome content that is not 100% garrison dependent. That's what it needs to do. Hopefully they're able to do it, and at some point I will get my thoughts together on that and hopefully bring you some sort of video. Anyway, we're clocking it at around 10 minutes here, and I think those questions actually just sort of round things off very concisely, so I'm going to end the Q&A here. As always, if you've got any questions, throw them down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching the show, and I will see you next time.